You no longer have to worry, fret or panic about IELTS because we are here to guide you through this test jungle. Enjoy these IELTS tutorials, and if you need more help or want to access the famous online course, you can visit us at IELTSPodcast.com.
Hi everybody, my name is Ellen, and today I'm going to be talking to you about spelling for IELTS. Spelling is something I think in general that we're not really too concerned about these days, because with most of us using computers in our day-to-day lives, these conveniently check and correct sometimes our spelling for us automatically. So I think a lot of us nowadays have stopped really concerning ourselves with spelling. And I know that's certainly obvious if I look online and I see how a lot of people write. It's clear that even native speakers have a hard time spelling. However, there are some times, and of course IELTS is one of those times, when you don't have the luxury of a spell check feature, and so it's really important that you have accuracy here. Spelling is checked and it is accounted for in the vocabulary, in the lexical resources part of your score for writing. And of course, if you write an answer wrong in listening or in reading, it's also counted wrong. So you can see that as far as IELTS is concerned, spelling is super important. So what I want to talk about in today's podcast is some of the most common spelling errors that I have found through my years of teaching and in general being here as part of the IELTSPodcast.com team. So without further ado, let's talk about what some of those mistakes are. The first mistake that a lot of people make is to add extra letters to words. So, for example, one of my students used to do this. The word persuade. It's a funny word because you've got that U and that A together and then the D. So she always had this funny thing where she would add an I after the A. So it was UAIDE. I guess she thought that made the A sound long, but that's a mistake. And of course, I would correct her on it, and but that's one mistake that a lot of people do. They add extra letters. Maybe they've learned some rules about spelling, because there are a number of rules out there. And they just kind of, make stuff up by themselves. Another really common mistake, and this is really common, is doubling letters. For example, some students write opinion with a double P. There are a lot of words in English, of course, that have that double P, but opinion is not one of them. Okay, and this is really, really common. However, equally common is actually removing the double letter, okay, the double consonant primarily. So, for example, if you have a word like disappointment, a lot of people skip that P because there's two P's there in disappointment. Or what they do is they add a double S, so it's DISS, which is of course wrong. So these are some common words where a word like tomorrow, people miss that double R and instead they put a double M, which is wrong. Or necessary. Necessary is a word that honestly even native speakers get wrong. There is a double S, but a lot of times people will put in a double C instead. The same thing happens with the word recommend. There's a double M in recommend, but a lot of people will double the C instead. Embarrass is a word people mess up a lot, as is also unnecessary. A lot of people put that double C there, but it's really supposed to be just one double S. And if you get the word unnecessary, it's a double N and a double S. So it gives people a lot of problems. Now, there are some words that people just leave out letters for some reason. Maybe because a lot of these words have a short vowel sound, and so people just neglect to put the letter in. A word like this is literature. Okay, it's literature, so it's 4 syllables. But a lot of people end up writing this word literature or literature, actually, and skip that A. But it does have that A in there. This is a schwa sound, and so that might be part of the reason why people leave it out. It's not a stressed syllable, and so it's easy to kind of forget that it exists. Another word that I find a lot of people have trouble with, and they often remove an extra consonant in this word, is the word surprise. I have found people spell it wrong in one of 2 ways. They either skip that second R, so it's surprise, or they skip the first R and they make it surprise, which is really common because even native speakers pronounce the word like this sometimes. We don't often say, oh, surprise. Sometimes you'll hear people actually say surprise. So that kind of explains how this spelling mistake happens. But in fact, there are 2 R's in the word, so keep that in mind. Another mistake that a lot of English language learners make is putting the wrong double vowel. You guys probably know that English has tons of double vowel sounds, tons of combinations. So sometimes, I've seen this with some of my students, people will write really kind of basic words wrong, like the word dreams. I've seen people write it with a double E instead of the EA. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind as well with those double vowels. Another really frequent mistake, and I want to say this about this mistake. This, for me, is probably one of the biggest problems that you can possibly have with spelling in IELTS. A lot of times people write the wrong word. So, for example, people write loose, L-O-O-S-E, instead of lose, which is just a 1 O. I've seen some of my students write prospective instead of perspective, or precede, which is P-R-E-C-E-D-E, instead of proceed. Another really common one is affect and effect. One is with an E, the other is with an A. Now, why is this spelling mistake so problematic? Well, the reason is because both spellings create different words. So it's not a mistake where the examiner is like, oh, okay, the person spelled it wrong. This is the word the student meant. No problem. It actually can also lead to incoherence, and that's what you don't want to happen. So you have to be extra specially careful about these kinds of mistakes. Another really common one, even with native speakers, is the word there. Now, there are 3 different spellings for the word there, so you have to be extremely careful with spelling the right one, okay? So, moving on to our next spelling mistake. Sometimes students use the wrong vowel in the word. So, for example, the word tertiary. Okay, often we use the expression tertiary education. I have seen students write it with an I instead of an E. It's supposed to be T-E-R, but some students have written it T-I-R. Maybe they're thinking of the word third, which also has that T-H-I. So that might explain the mistake, but in fact it's wrong and it's T-E-R. Another super common mistake like this is the word definite. Tons of people spell it accidentally. They spell it A-T-E. There is not an A-T-E in the word definite. It's actually I-T-E. But again, it's a spelling mistake that's super common. So be careful about that. One of the difficulties with English is the fact that we have 2 different letters that make the sound "s". So depending on the word, you might see an S or you might see a C. And so you can imagine how many spelling mistakes this leads to. So for example, I have seen students write the word expenses wrong. I see this a lot actually. So the first S in the word expenses is an S. It's not a C, but I have seen students write it with a C. I have also seen people write the word society wrong. So I've seen people write it SOS when really, in fact, it's SOC. And another word people get wrong a lot is the word service. So that second S in the word is sometimes spelled with is supposed to be spelled with a C, not an S. Okay, so it's SERVICE. That's the correct way to spell it. Another really interesting thing is that English, kind of having borrowed from a lot of other languages, has a lot of similar words with other languages. So if you speak some of these other languages, then you might find that when you write in English, you actually write with the foreign spelling. Let me be a little clearer about what I mean. So for example, in English we have the word house, mouse, and photo. Well, German uses the same words, but they're spelled differently. So house is spelled H-A-U-S in German. In English, of course, it's spelled H-O-U-S-E. So if you are familiar with German or other languages where this kind of phenomenon happens, you have to be really careful to make sure that you're using the English spelling and not the spelling of another language. Okay, our next spelling mistake that's really common, I mentioned the schwa before, which is that kind of unstressed sound, and any letter, any vowel rather I should say, can make that sound. So you've got words, like I said before, definite, and then you've got desperate, and you've got separate. These are words that a lot of people spell wrong because of that unstressed vowel. So we talked about definite before. If you look at desperate, people are kind of like, well, what's that last vowel sound? Desperate. Is it a U? Is it an A? Is it an I? Is it an E? It's actually an A, but people get it wrong all the time. The same thing applies to separate. A lot of people spell the second syllable with an E instead of an A. Okay? But it is in fact E and then A and then A again. So these are also words you have to be careful about. English has lots of tricky rules. Sometimes when you change the form of a word, you have to change how it's spelled. So if you look at a word like influence, it ends with a CE, but when you make it an adjective, it becomes influential, and it's a TIAL. A similar thing happens with the word benefit, but it's the opposite actually, because benefit ends with an IT, but when you make it an adjective, beneficial, it's CIAL. So that just adds to the confusion, especially if you look at influential, which is TIAL, and then beneficial, which is CIAL. You can understand why a lot of students get confused. Another word that confuses us when it changes form is the word maintain. So you have an AIN in that second syllable, but when you make it a noun, maintenance, that second syllable is all of a sudden TEN. Okay? So if I had a dollar or a euro for every time I saw this word spelled wrong, I'd be very wealthy. But yeah, it is a problematic word, so be aware of it and be careful. And talking about the word maintenance, it has another problem basically because it belongs to another category of words that end with ANCE or ENCE. So people sometimes write an E, maintenance, with an E instead of an A. Influence, I mean, these are all words that end in the NCE. So people a lot of times confuse that last vowel. Is it an A? Is it an E? So you've got to be careful with these words as well. There are a lot of silent letters in English, lots of them all over the place, so it's kind of difficult to remember that silent letter sometimes. So if you've got a word like autumn or column, That N is silent at the end, so it's really easy to forget it. You need to be careful about that. I think that in IELTS, the words that I see that have silent letters that are misspelled more often than just about any word is definitely environment. There's an N in there that people always forget to write, okay? Environment. And then government. It's the same thing because there's that word govern in there, but people always forget about that N and just make it government. So you have to be careful about that, okay? Especially when you think about how many topics in IELTS deal with either government or the environment. So they're words that's really important to write correctly. Now, I mentioned before that English has been influenced by other languages. Of course, there's tons of foreign words in English. So there are certain words that kind of create a problem for people writing in English. Looking at one category of words, there are words that come from Greek, which can be really tricky for people, like the word rhythm. All right, there's a lot of stuff going on in there, lots of H's, lots of Y's. This is a word that lots of people spell wrong. They either forget that first H or I don't know. They just it's a word that creates a lot of problems. The word rhythm, RHYTHM. But I've seen it spelled a trillion different ways. Unbelievable, really. It's a tricky word. I mean, that's why, so it's understandable. Also, the word psychology. This is one that people mess up all the time. They forget the S. They forget the P. They definitely forget that H in there. Psych. Okay, it's a CH. People forget it all the time. I often see it spelled GIE. Okay, so you have to be careful about that too. In English, we spell it with a Y, so be careful. Another word spelled wrong a lot, hierarchy. It's a tricky word, so be careful with how you spell it. And also the word xenophobia is spelled wrong, partially because the sound is Z in the beginning of the word, but we spell it with an X, and then it's got that PH in there, which makes it a little tricky too. Some people will write it with an F, and that's true for a lot of words that come from Greek. So words like photography, people spell wrong. They spell it with an F as well. So you have to be careful about stuff like that. But it's not just Greek words that are tricky for us. There are a lot of French words in English as well. And these have some tricky spelling as well. So you've got words like chauffeur, which could be tricky. Connoisseur, which has that double N. It has that double S. It's got vowels kind of all over the place. O-I, E-U, tricky words. All right. So if you are going to use it, it is a great word if you can use it appropriately and if it fits in something you're writing. So it's a good word to spell correctly. A couple of other words that we see a lot are rendezvous, which has a couple of silent letters in there. So you have to be careful with how you spell it. And the word silhouette, which is also kind of tricky. Other words that I see spelled incorrectly a lot, also because there's silent letters in there, but there's just a lot going on in these words. I'm speaking specifically about the word conscience and conscientious. I'll be honest with you, I'm pretty good with spelling, but I definitely spell conscientious wrong all the time. For some reason, I throw in an extra IT in there, so I make it like conscientious or something really bizarre. But so just don't feel bad about some of these spelling mistakes. Like I said, I mean, I've been teaching IELTS for over 12 years, 14 years, something like that. And there are some words that I too have trouble with. Conscientious is one of them. So you have to be careful about it. It's a great word to use, but it does need a little bit of care. The next words that I want to talk about are words that have double vowels, but a lot of times people reverse the vowels. So words that I'm thinking of are weird. So a lot of people spell it I-E-R-D, but it's actually W-E-I. And this, I can't even tell you how many times I see receive spelled wrong a lot. So be careful with that. It's E-I-V-E. And it's interesting because there's a rule in English about that we used to learn when we were children in elementary school. They would teach us I before E, except after C, and yet, we get this wrong all the time. It's C-I-E-V-E in the word receive. Now, the last common spelling mistake that I want to talk about is, again, it has to do with vowels. Okay, so you've got like two vowels next to each other, the E sound is what we usually see when you've got like EI or you've got EA. So you see these a lot, but sometimes the EA sound actually makes a short vowel sound. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about words like bread, spread, thread, lead. There's that short vowel sound. And so a lot of times people are tempted not to put that A in there. Okay? And so it's just, for example, spread would be S-P-R-E-D, and that's wrong. There is an A in there. I guess you could say it's silent, but people mess this up all the time. Now, I also mentioned the word lead. The word lead is really interesting because we think about the metal a lot of times, and it's L-E-A-D when it's the metal. But a lot of times, people spell the past tense of lead the same way. I don't know if that made sense. So L-E-D, the past tense of to lead somebody or to lead a country, for example. The past tense is led, but it's L-E-D. And people spell this all the time, they spell it wrong. So they spell it L-E-A-D, like the metal. Or like the present tense of the verb. Confusing? Yes, I know. It just needs a little bit of care. So, those are some of the most common spelling mistakes that I have discovered, that I have found. Surely there are other spelling mistakes. A lot of times it's just, carelessness, it's just rushing. So the question then becomes, well, what do you do to improve your spelling? Well, for one thing, you don't want to rely on spell check. When you're writing your essays for IELTS, definitely try to work without spell check. When you write it out, because you don't want it influencing, you don't want to rely on it. It's important to learn how to spell correctly on your own. I guess after you're done with the essay, you can check and you can be like, oh, wow, I made mistakes. It's a good way to learn. But while you're writing, don't rely on spell check to correct your spelling or even point it out to you until you're done. But definitely write down the words that you're spelling wrong. Make a list of what they are. Make a list of some of the words you're having trouble learning, and just try to commit the correct spelling to memory. I know that writing down words is something that has helped me, either learning languages or, just even spelling some tricky words. So give it a shot. Write down the words that are giving you some trouble. Also, learn some of the rules. There are some rules about spelling. I know that there are also a lot of exceptions, but learning a few rules regarding spelling in English can really help quite a bit. So I recommend that as well. I also recommend reading a lot, as much as you can in English. Sometimes just seeing the words correctly spelled in reputable sources, of course. Sometimes seeing those words can help you, in a way, photograph it and kind of commit it to your memory. That helps too. If you see it spelled correctly a lot, then it'll help you to spell it correctly. So I hope you found this information helpful. Spelling can be tricky in English. I realize that. But with a little care and a little work, I know you can all achieve great spelling. As we know, it's important for your lexical resources score in writing. And again, as I said before, it can make something be counted wrong in reading and listening. So definitely be careful. I wish you all the best of luck with your IELTS preparation. So until next time, bye-bye.
for listening to IELTSPodcast.com.